Hello, my name is Michael Beauregard, and I write the Old North State Stories column for the Daily Tar Heel in Chapel Hill. This podcast will serve as a place for me to share other stories from North Carolina's history, ones that I didn't necessarily want to relegate to a 700-word article. So today, the first episode will be about the Carolina Gold Rush, a period about 5 decades, where North Carolina was the largest gold-producing state in the United States. Our story begins hundreds of years ago in the initial age of exploration. One of the primary reasons Europeans came to the Americas in the 1500s and 1400s was to find gold, and lots of it. The Spaniards in particular were famously searching for the city of gold, El Dorado. Though they never found this city, they did find or take a lot of silver and gold from South and Central America, extracting hundreds of billions of dollars worth of this stuff over the course of their reign of the region. The English were also wanting to get in on this action and set up colonies in the New World as well. In the 1500s, they set up a colony on Roanoke Island in North Carolina, which famously failed. And in the early 1600s, they set up a more successful colony in Jamestown in Virginia. The goal of both of these colonies was to find gold in North America, though neither succeeded in that goal. Jamestown, however, did discover tobacco that was being used by Native Americans at the time, and turned it into a fairly lucrative cash crop and one of the major exports of the Americas for centuries to come. So going forward several hundred years during the American Revolution, there was a Hessian soldier named John Reed. Like the rest of the Hessian soldiers there, he was a mercenary hired out from Germany by the British to fight the Patriots. He fought in New England and New York before being transferred down to South Carolina and Georgia, and it was there at some point that he was either kicked out or deserted from the military. He and several other Hessians made their way northward into modern-day Carberris County, North Carolina, where they set up a small settlement on the Little Meadow Creek. There they built a small Lutheran church and built their homesteads. John Reed ended up becoming a fairly successful farmer, raising with his wife 8 children. By the turn of the 18th century, Western North Carolina was not exactly a prosperous region. It was mostly inhabited by yeoman farmers, or subsistence farmers that were primarily growing what they could eat and growing a little extra just to pay the bills. In 1799, John Reed's son Conrad Reed skipped out on church one Sunday afternoon, and while he was fishing in a nearby creek, he came across a large rock that he thought looked curious, and he brought it back home. Soon thereafter, John Reed took the rock to a local jeweler, but he couldn't figure out what it was. They kept the rock and used it as a doorstop for several years after its discovery. In 1803, John Reed went to Fayetteville on business and brought the rock with him to get it inspected by a bigger town jeweler who might know what they were looking at. The local jeweler was able to determine that it was indeed gold, a 17-pound nugget of it, which that is a substantial amount of gold. Now, John Reed, being a backcountry farmer and a former soldier, didn't exactly know the true worth of the gold, and the jeweler bought it off of him for $3.50, which he said was a fair price. Sometime on his journey back to Carberris County, he discovered that the nugget was actually worth $3,600. He went back to the jeweler and ended up getting some of that money. So upon returning to Carberris County with his cash in hand, Reed met with several of his neighbors, and they together formed a mining company and set up shop in the Little Meadow Creek where 12-year-old Conrad had discovered the boulder. So the men and their slaves began digging, and eventually one of the slaves, Peter, found a gigantic 28-pound nugget of gold just buried under the surface. That being said, this wasn't a sophisticated mine that we would think of nowadays. They were just quite literally digging into the ground to find gold. And the fact that they were finding a lot of it, just doing that was significant. That meant there was a lot of gold in the region. So, even though news spread fairly slowly at the time, it eventually did spread and more people came to the region. By 1825, however, a new innovation had been discovered that would allow people to build sophisticated mine shafts. So, a man named Matthias Barringer discovered that if you followed white quartz, which there was a lot of in the region, you would find large veins of gold buried deep underground. And this allowed people to predict where gold would be. Because it was deeper underground, they needed to build mine shafts like the modern sophisticated ones we know today. So Behringer's new innovation sparked a lot of mine building in the area around Charlotte. And lots of immigrants came to the area simply because they could strike it rich there, or they were imported by mine owners. A lot of immigrants came from, in particular, South America and the Cornwall region of England. The mining got so widespread at one point that in Montgomery County, there were 13 gold deposits discovered, and it made it the gold center of the United States. So back in Mecklenburg County, the Macomb mine became a gigantic operation with 1,000 workers, all imported by mine owner J. Humphrey Bissell from South American mining operations. So much like the West during their time of a lot of mining and gold discovery, North Carolina saw its fair share of boom and bust towns. One such town in Gold Hill in Rowan County ballooned in size when a farmer in the village discovered a nugget of gold on his property. It went from being a sleepy farming village to having 23 mines, its own post office. It also had 26 saloons, 6 brothels, and, of course, to rein in the rowdiness, a jail. So outside of attention for mining prospects there, the gold rush in North Carolina drew a lot of attention from Washington. In particular, then President Andrew Jackson, who was in fact born in the nearby Waxhaws region, had a mint built in the city of Charlotte in the late 1830s in order to mint all that gold that was being found into proper coinage. So between the mint's foundation in 1837 and its closure during the Civil War, it would produce upwards of $5 million in currency. The Civil War itself led to the closure of a lot of mines because so many of the miners just had to go to war. Either they were drafted or they volunteered for the Confederate military. One mine remained, the Silver Hill mine northeast of Charlotte, though it would primarily produce war-making materials. Though they did find gold and silver there, and in the desperate years of the later Confederacy, think 1864, 1865, they were running out of materials to make regular ammunition, so they were taking gold and silver and making bullets out of it. So Union soldiers towards the end of the Civil War, there was a chance that they were shot with literal silver bullets. So following the Civil War, mining came to a close in North Carolina. There were still a lot of mines, but it wasn't nearly as big as it was prior to the war. And a lot of this was due in part to larger discoveries out in the western part of the country, in California, and Colorado, and Idaho, and Nevada. There was a lot of mining going over there, and less attention was paid to North Carolina. However, like I said, there were still some mines open. Nothing much notable happened, except in 1904, tragedy struck a mine near Richfield in Stanley County. So in 1904, a particularly large vein of gold was found in the region, and a shaft was dug in order to drag that gold out. Over the course of just a few days, more than $500,000 worth of gold was taken just out of this vein. It was a pretty big deal at the time. However, on August 22nd, 1904, those fortunes came to a pretty dramatic conclusion. At around 2:30 in the afternoon, a gigantic rainstorm caused water to pour into the mine shaft, triggering an underground flash flood. In the end, all but one of the miners were killed in this flood, and the mine closed shortly thereafter, primarily due to the lawsuits from the families of the miners that were drowned. It is believed that there's still a pretty significant amount of gold down there, but Stanley County residents have routinely and vehemently opposed reopening the mine simply due to the danger involved in reopening it. There's still quite a bit of, a current legacy in North Carolina, and particularly in the Charlotte area, of the gold rush. The Reed Gold Mine is a state historic site now. It's a pretty interesting place. Within Charlotte itself, there is, of course, the Mint Museum. In the 1930s, the old Mint building was under threat of being destroyed by the federal government to expand a post office, though a local women's organization fought back and purchased the property and turned it into the Mint Museum that we know and love today. Of course, it's been expanded since then, but the original Mint building is still part of the museum. Other legacies include the UNC Charlotte 49ers mascot, of course a prospector, Though, interestingly enough, the name 49ers has nothing to do with gold mining. So in 1949, a gym was about to be closed, but the residents and the students at the school managed to prevent it from being closed. So 49ers, they kept the gym open, so those are the team names now, which I thought was pretty interesting. I thought it would obviously have to do something with the gold rush, but apparently not, just the prospector does. So aside from sports and the Mint Museum, there's one pseudo-legacy of the gold rush. The banking industry is massive in Charlotte today. In fact, Charlotte is now the second largest banking city in the United States. It's beaten out by New York City, because of course it is. But interestingly enough, in third place is San Francisco, another city characterized by its gold rush history. The success of the banking industry in Charlotte in particular more has to do with North Carolina's lax laws with regards to banking in the 1970s than it does with the gold rush, which I thought was disappointing. I thought there would be a pretty strong connection between the gold rush and banking, but oh well. So yeah, that is the gold rush of North Carolina. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'm hoping that in the future I can make these longer and a lot more in-depth, but this was kind of a trial run of what's to come. So please, if you don't mind, just tell me what you thought of the podcast, what I can do to improve, and even recommend topics for future ones, because I'm always looking for more information about North Carolina history. It's something I'm really fascinated with. In the description, I'll leave links to my sources. I particularly got a lot of information from the magazine Our State, which, if you're interested at all in North Carolina history, I definitely recommend reading their articles. They have a lot of good stuff. I also got a lot of information from the Encyclopedia of North Carolina, which is also a very good resource for North Carolina history if you want to learn more. So yeah, thank you for listening, and have a great week.